All right. So welcome everyone to the the Sierra Club Calusa group, who is in charge of 4 counties, Glades, Hendry, Collier, and Lee counties. We are here to make sure that you have up-to-date information about environmental activities that we are championing up. We have a guest speaker tonight, and that speaker is Captain Chris Wittman. Captain Chris Wittman is a career outdoorsman, spending over 20 years as a fishing and hunting guide, nationally renowned tournament angler, on-camera host, and TV show producer. As a 4th-generation Florida native, Captain Chris witnessed firsthand the destruction caused by Florida's water mismanagement, leading him to co-found Captains for Clean Water. Captain Chris' professional experience has positioned Captains for Clean Water to engage leading brands and personalities across the industry, collectively mobilizing outdoor community to take action against water quality issues like never before. As a program director, Captain Chris identifies needs and opportunities to expand the organization's reach and impact through initiatives, programs, and partnerships, ultimately turning years of work on the water into his mission to save Florida waters. So with that said, I'm going to hand our meeting over to Captain Chris Wittman. Welcome to Calusa Group, Sierra Club Calusa Group.
Everybody, thanks for having me.
Hi, Chris.
How are y'all?
Outstanding.
Good. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to join you guys. As you know, I'm born and raised here. I grew up on a little island west of here called Sanibel, and spent my entire life on fishing these waters and surfing and snorkeling and scuba diving and hiking and hunting in the Everglades. And there's no place more special to me than the outdoors of Florida, that's for sure. So shaped me into the person I am, led me to pursue a career in the outdoors as a fishing guide. And I think the big thing is throughout my life, even as a kid, I can remember the impacts of our water quality issues, specifically, damaging discharges from Lake Okeechobee. And throughout my childhood and my whole career as a fishing guide, I kind of felt like it was just a problem bigger than I could, have an impact on. There was nothing much I could do about it. It was kind of like, I guess I kind of felt like it was like living in Florida and dealing with hurricanes. It was just something I had to deal with. And, in hindsight, that was a really wrong way and bad way to look at it. I just felt like the fight was too big for a single person, a fishing guide, someone like myself with, not a bunch of money to throw into politics or connections or whatever. I just felt like it was something that, I couldn't have an effect. And really, I think, when we started the organization in 2016, when we were having, just absolutely, as you all experienced, devastating discharges from the lake in our tourist season, some of the other fishing guides who were newer to guiding, I had been guiding 17, 18 years at that time. They came to me and basically were saying, hey, this is a problem. We what are we going to do? And that kind of was a wake up call, I guess, that all these guys felt like this, that, there was not much we could do about it. But at the same time, if something didn't happen, if somebody didn't do something, the future of our careers, and more importantly, everything that was special to us and our way of life, was at stake. And so, we didn't set out to start an organization. We're very happy. That was my dream job. I traveled around the country fishing tournaments and, made a very good living guiding clients here after, their pursuits and tarpon and snook and permit and some of the most sought after species in the world of saltwater fishing. And had no interest of, you know, walking away from that by any means, and had no experience in the realm of an organization or anything that goes along with that. But what we knew is something needed to be done. We honestly just decided that we needed to try to get other people like ourselves, other people in our community who were concerned with these issues, but also maybe felt that they did not have an outlet to make their voice heard, or felt like this was a problem bigger than they could attack or have affect real change. And so we literally started a Facebook group, and the fact that Daniel and myself and a couple guys that started it were all fishing captains, and we wanted clean water, we just decided we'll call the group Captains for Clean Water. And we basically just at the time didn't know what we were going to do, but we knew we had to do something. And so we did this. We started documenting what we were seeing, the habitat destruction, and probably I don't know, a couple weeks in, Daniel and I decided we were going to go to Tallahassee to talk to our representatives and let them know. And maybe if we let them know how this was affecting our local businesses and economy and our way of life, that it would get fixed. And, you know, it was pretty obvious that I think we left there pissed off and more determined than ever to do something about it. So we came back home. We put a message out on our newly formed Facebook page that we were going to have a meeting at Bass Pro Shops. And we had reached out to the manager there and asked if we could use their conference room that I think he said seated about 65 or 75 people. He let us do that. We put a message on Facebook on, you know, Wednesday night, I think it was, and that we were going to have a meeting on Friday. And come Friday evening, about 300 people showed up, and all the news stations showed up. And what was unique about that to us was two things. Was one, we saw that the public, our communities, recognized this issue and had a desire to affect change. We also recognized that, you know, this was something that people were willing to gather around and stand side by side with each other, that had different political views and different socioeconomic status and different religious views and different careers. And that it, not only were they willing, but that was the key. Like, this affected everybody, and we all had to stand together and work together if we were really going to make change. And I remember what kind of struck me about that was that in this meeting, we had fishing guides like myself. We had recreational fishermen, weekend warriors. We had commercial fishermen, commercial shrimpers, stone crabbers, mullet fishermen. These are people that a lot of times clashed, you know, as user groups. In this instance, they were united. And so we saw this as not only an opportunity, but a necessity for us to unite our community. And also from what we witnessed in Tallahassee, which when we kind of went up there, we're going, you know, look, we've seen the seagrasses die that we fished as a kid. We've seen the oyster bars that were some of the most productive oyster bars to fish die. We've seen snook die. We had, you know, witnessed this habitat loss. And for our policymakers, what we see is maybe there's a disconnect. They don't all have that connection or experience with those ecosystems to see the value in that. You know, it's like, that's sad that the manatees are dying or that your oyster bars have died, but how do they quantify that? And how do they put a value on that? And that kind of made us realize that even though what got our attention with this and why we cared about this was because of the environment, that a lot of times our policymakers just didn't know, like we work on our primary goal is Everglades restoration. And I'd say a lot of times, I think half the people that we meet with in Washington, D.C. or Tallahassee, when they think of the Everglades, they think of a series of maps and, in a briefing binder, in a place, in a folder. And when I think of the Everglades, I think of the experiences it's given me. I think of the wildlife that is there. I think of, how special it is. And so that's when we kind of came up with a plan. Like if we were going to get their attention and we had to speak their language. And so we needed to focus on how these environmental issues are affecting our economy and our communities, because fishing guides are some of the first people to see the effects and feel the effects of these water quality issues. But every single person in our community is affected, even if they don't realize it, whether it's the real estate market, the hospitality industry, the tourism industries. Everyone is affected, property values. So if we could take and get our arms around everybody and present the facts of this is what's happening because of water quality to our economy and to our businesses, that is a language that our policymakers understand and can put a number on. They understand jobs, they understand, revenue, and that was kind of the connection we need to make. Then the more we learned about Everglades restoration and the fact that this massive restoration project or suite of projects to reverse the damage and changes that were made 100 years ago in draining the Everglades, this was a partnership between the state and the federal government and a cost share. And so we were also going to need federal support for these projects. And that's where we recognized that we could lean on our partners for the same thing that we were making the case of economy with our local businesses, hotel owners, restaurant owners, realtors, bartenders, servers, you name it. We needed to make that same case at a federal level. And that's where we could lean on our partners that we have had relationships with for the past 15 years as fishing guides, such as Yeti or Costa Sunglasses or Sims or Patagonia, big international brands that a large part of their market share is here in Florida. And Florida's water quality affects their business. Yeti's based in Texas, but what happens in Florida is very important to their business. And so if we're going to make the case for federal funding and federal support, when you have other projects fighting for those valuable dollars all around the country, we were going to need the support of the other representatives from the other 49 states. And the way we would get that support is by, companies and leaders in those industries making their, pleading their case of how important water quality was and why investing in Everglades restoration was in fact an investment and was a needed and good investment. And so that's kind of where, the path that we saw we needed to take. We also recognized that, looking at myself, I've been in the industry my whole professional career. I grew up on the water, yet I was not involved. Like that is, looking back on that, that's completely insane. It's like completely unacceptable. But I just never, I never saw the path or understood the value or importance of my individual voice. And, now we saw that same thing with the outdoor community and the outdoor industry. The fishing and outdoors industry is, this affects them probably more than any other business, but they were relatively absent in the fight. And so we needed, if anyone, those industries in the outdoor community that make our living on the back of these resources owe it to those resources to not only be in the fight, but to lead the fight. They should be leading the fight that their industry relies on. And so that was kind of the where we saw a missing link and where we saw an ability for us to close that gap and bring into the fold a group, part of our community that was relatively absent from these efforts in years past. And so that's what we did. This was a complete snowball. It went from literally within a few months from us forming a Facebook page to having hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people joining us, to having national media reaching out. And it became apparent really quick that if we were going to actually take this seriously and move the needle and be effective in what we identified that we needed to do, there was going to take a lot more than what we kind of thought in the beginning is we'll work on this on the weekends in between our charters. What made us really good fishing guides was that we dedicated our lives to that. We lived it. We breathed it. It was every waking minute. If we were not on the water, we were preparing for it. We were keeping track of the weather patterns. We knew the pattern of the fish like that. We had to give 110%. That's what made us good at guides. And I think that's what makes you exceptional at whatever your chosen endeavor is that level of dedication. And so it became pretty clear about 6 months in, Daniel and I were kind of running this from our homes. And I remember we were like, oh, we're going to have a rally or something. And we decided, let's get some hats made. And I think we pulled together like some of our money and we bought like 24 hats or something, for $10 a piece or $15 a piece. And I remember thinking like, gosh, I sure hope we can get rid of these things. We just dropped $250 on these hats. Oh, my lights just went out in my office here. Hold on. There we go.
Hey, we like energy efficiency. Nothing wrong with that.
That's right. And so it's just kind of funny and ironic because now our hats are kind of like our symbol and there's, thousands of them around, but it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that if we were going to be effective in this, we were going to have to give it the same dedication that we had given our careers as fishing guides. And that was a pretty scary thought, especially for myself. I mean, I had spent, 2 decades, my entire professional life, building this business, building clientele, building a reputation, traveling around the country, fishing on ESPN and, producing an outdoor television show. And I dedicated my life to building my career as a fishing guide. Daniel Andrews, walked away from a full ride scholarship to pursue his dream job as a fishing guide. And so all of a sudden we were kind of faced with this decision of, if you're either going to be a fishing guide and hope somebody else fixes the problem, or you're going to have to face the decision of walking away from your dream job in order to try to save the places that, afforded you your dream job in the first place. And that was like literally the heaviest decision I know that I've ever had to make, hands down. I mean, one, just the money, on its own, the freedom, you charge $1,000 a day as a fishing guide. And, I could take 100 days off a year if I wanted 100. I could take, I'm going to go out to Yellowstone for a month. I'm going to, so it was like, it was a pretty heavy decision but was one that, we knew we had to make and we did. And now I can't believe it's been 5 years. Here we are 5 years later. I don't regret the decision. I certainly miss guiding. I miss the free time. My days of being on the water from sun up to sundown and, literally, I would spend probably 3 or 4 days on the water for every one day I spent on land. And, traded those days for Zoom meetings and trips to Tallahassee and water management district meetings and Army Corps meetings. I know more acronyms now than I ever cared to know. Um, but, uh, I think we continue to be inspired because we continue to see our communities rally together. Uh, to me, this is something that in today's climate, societal climate and political climate, where there's like so much division, that this is something that can bring people together. This is something that this is a this isn't a this is a nonpartisan issue. It should be, and it's going to require bipartisan support. And it's just an opportunity where rarely in today's world do you see that. And I'm inspired to see all these different people, different walks of life, all working together and rowing in the same direction and actually moving the needle. And we look at this, the more we learn, and we learn every day. We know there's, science. This is an issue where the science is there. It's like, here's this plan to fix these things, but there hasn't been the political will. And from my experience, there's two ways you get political will. You can have millions, tens of millions of dollars and influence politicians and campaign finance and all that, which we do not have. Or you can have the voice of the masses and have everybody speaking the same thing and pushing and being vocal. And the way you get that is by educating people, making them understand the problem, the solutions, and the importance of their involvement and their voice. And so that's what we set out to do with Captains for Clean Water, is make an organization that we can educate people. We stay laser focused on Everglades restoration. From what we had experienced, it was difficult for us to go up there and ask for 15 different things in a 3-minute meeting or a 5-minute meeting. And so we identify, okay, there's problems. There's problems with sewage infrastructure. There's problems with septic. There's problems with phosphate mining. There's problems with our springs being drained. Unfortunately, Florida's dying from 1,000 cuts, and there's all these problems. But we knew that, especially, we're a small organization. We couldn't, if we tried to tackle all of them at once, we would simply be spinning our wheels. And I guess we have we have a saying that, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. And that's what we remain focused on, is in order to be effective, we are going to focus on Everglades restoration. We're going to focus on educating people on the importance of this, and that these solutions and the priority solutions that we see within Everglades restoration not only will help, us here in Southwest Florida in our backyard, they'll benefit the communities in Lake Okeechobee. They'll benefit the communities on the East Coast. They'll benefit the Everglades National Park and Florida Bay, the drinking water supply for 8 million Floridians in Miami and Dade. And so we're looking at it through the eyes of a policymaker, this is an investment that has a tremendous amount of ROI for people all around the state. And it helps us keep the focus on addressing a big part of these cause of these problems, which is, the altered water flow in the southern part of the system, versus looking at, if we only looked at things through the lens of like what's happening in our backyard. A lot of times, human nature, we'd have the tendency to try to come up with solutions to the symptoms of the problem rather than the cause of the problem. So if we're just looking at Cape Coral, how do we get the blue-green algae out of the canals? And we bring in these big shop vac trucks and suck it out, and all those bubble curtains and all this other stuff. Well, you're just addressing the symptom. and you're not addressing the cause. And so that was by focusing on what are holistic solutions that benefit the system as a whole. This is one giant ecosystem. It's not just Pine Island Sound, Fort Myers Beach. It's a giant ecosystem, and we need to look at solutions and focus and prioritize solutions that benefit the entire system. And so that's what we've remained kind of laser focused on. We've seen that within the 68 projects of the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan, there are some that are going to provide greater benefit to others. And so we should prioritize those. We should move those up on what's called the IDS, or the integrated delivery schedule, and really push for those big projects to be done first, because we can't do them all at the same time, unfortunately. So that's kind of been our focus. That remains our fight. We view this as a war, I guess. And within a war, there's many battles. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. There's times of celebration, but look, people popped champagne bottles and celebrated back in 2000 when the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan was voted into law, and thought that we've done it. We're going to fix this. Here we are 20 years later, 21 years later. So we need to celebrate the progress and the wins that we've made, but we need to also be realistic and realize that there's going to be wins. We're going to win these battles, and we're going to lose some battles, but we have to stay focused on the end goal, and not let up until we restore the Everglades and we fix these issues that are, affecting millions and millions of people in Florida. And so we feel that the way to do that is through education and outreach, and getting people to understand those problems and why we need them involved. And so that's what we've done, and that's what we continue to do.
And that's a great. You guys have been among the most successful organizations in a short amount of time, particularly in our region. So with that success, how is it that you were able to grow beyond just locally? I mean, how did you reach out to people beyond just Florida hospitality, Florida shrimpers, Florida mullet captains? How'd you get beyond that?
A big part of it was our backgrounds and the relationships that we had. As a tournament angler, I fished all over the country. I had sponsorship deals with big brands from different parts of the country, from Connecticut to New Hampshire to Texas to Montana and California. And so we leaned on those relationships. We went to those people who we had relationships with at those companies and said, hey, here's this thing that's going on. We need your help. And I'll tell you, even locally, when we first started, it wasn't like everyone was on board. When we first started, a lot of our fellow fishing guides were like, shut up, you guys are bringing attention to this. It's bad for business. The hospitality industry or the tourism industry, it's like, look, this is bad for business. This is national news. And that's kind of a short-sighted way to look at it. And I think that's probably kind of how we looked at it in the past, but we made the case, like, if we can't just stick our head in the sand, like if the longer we wait, the harder this is going to be to fix, and you will be affected, and you are being affected. And so I think when we started, there was some skepticism. There was some, we're not sure, it's political. We're not sure if we could get involved or this or that. And that was, 2016, 2017. Then 2018 hit, and it was 2016 all over again, but even worse. And we had this massive red tide blooms, as you all know. We had whale shark wash up on Sanibel's Beach. We had blue-green algae in the canals in Cape Coral, Fort Myers. It was like apocalyptic. And that's when I think everybody went, okay, you're right. Like, we're in. That's when we really saw that next level of buy-in. But really, it all came back to education. It came back to us going to, the president of marketing at Yeti, or at Sims in Montana, or, Ray Marine in New Hampshire, and saying like, look, how much of your market share is in Florida? It's a lot. And if we don't do something, this is going to affect your bottom line. And in 2018, they felt it. They saw that it affected their bottom line. And so we've slowly, just through education of the communities, education of the decision makers at those brands, have been able to get more and more people involved. We've fortunate today that, through the tools with social media, we can reach millions of people. We know that we have to put together very strategic and effective campaigns and messaging. We got to make our point to people in 2 minutes, because attention spans are so short, and we read headlines and that's about it these days. So through that, leaned back on my career, producing outdoor television show, and that a picture can speak 1,000 words. And so we try to tell a lot of stories and do a lot of education through video. So anyway, that's how we've done that.
Yeah. So just think about that. You mentioned how you all are laser-like focused, but you mentioned like 5 topics, between the algae, between the fish die-off, between the whale shark wash-ups, between the dolphin wash-ups, between the manatee wash-ups. How do you keep a laser-like focus on like 5 major things that are all like headline grabbing attention getters?
The cause of those was one thing. The cause of those was these discharges from Okeechobee. If we had red tide, if we hadn't had 10,000 cubic feet per second of polluted, nutrient-rich water coming out of the lake, basically dumping fuel on a forest fire, we wouldn't have a red tide that was so severe and that lasted, years. We wouldn't have the blue-green algae that came from the lake and sat in those canals and festered. Those were all symptoms of our water management in a broken, disconnected system. And so if we can clean the water, if we can get the water going south in the dry season when the Everglades needs it, then we fix those problems, or at least a big bulk of those problems. And, we witnessed it the year before we started Captains. They lost 40,000 acres of seagrass in Florida Bay. That's more seagrass than we have in Pine Island Sound. And so that was a result of hypersaline conditions. The water that was destroying our ecosystem was needed down there. And so that's why we stay focused there. It's look, when we talk about the pollution or nutrient load to our lower estuary, to Pine Island Sound in that area, 70%, over 70%, 78% of that comes from east of the Franklin Locks. So almost 80% of the nutrients, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the pollutants, are discharged into that estuary. So yeah, do we have problems with sewage infrastructure here in Fort Myers? Absolutely. Do we have problems with, people fertilizing their yards where they have seawalls and it goes in the canal? Absolutely. But are we going to focus our limited amount of bandwidth and resource and time and money on the 20%, or are we going to focus it on the 80%? And so it's like they're all important, but that's where we try to focus, and we support and are very grateful to other organizations like Sierra Club or like Calusa Waterkeeper, who are working in those different arenas, right? I mean, Calusa Waterkeeper is focused right there in the river. Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation focused right there in that area. So it's we know that there's all these different problems, but what is going to make us effective in tackling this massive issue is to stay focused, and that's what we try to do.
Well, thinking of Lake Okeechobee, and I'm going to ask this last question, then I'm going to open it up to everybody else because I'm sure there's a bunch of people that have questions for you as well. But think of Lake Okeechobee and the cleaning activity that the Army Corps of Engineers is doing with the reservoir construction. Do you feel that's truly a good solution, or is that just a Band-Aid, or what are your thoughts on that process?
As far as the EAA reservoir?
Correct.
Yeah. So I think that we have two issues in Lake Okeechobee. One is nutrient load, pollution, and the other is water conveyance. And if you look at it, the nutrient load has to be addressed with water policy, putting laws into place with real teeth that stop the nutrient load from getting into the lake from the first place. But the water comes in, you hear a lot of times, 98%, 95% of the water comes into the lake from the north. Yeah, that's how God intended it. That's how it's always come in. So the water conveyance has to be handled south. It needs to be sent south like Mother Nature intended. And so the solution, if like I picture like our water system, picture the Kissimmee River Valley being your house and your plumbing system. And that feeds into your septic tank. And then your septic tank filters out into your drain field. Well, what we did is we came up and we put a dam around the septic tank and we cut off the drain field. So now the septic tank fills up and there's nowhere for it to go. So it goes out these relief valves on the east and west coast. So the solution is not to make the pipe that flows into the septic tank smaller or plug it up and have it start backing up out of our sinks and showers. The solution is to reconnect that drain field. So we need to look at how we got into this situation. We came up a system that flowed from Orlando all the way to the Keys, and we stopped it halfway up. So the way to fix the conveyance is to return its ability to flow south. We have to stop the nutrients from getting into the system. But Lake Okeechobee already has so many legacy nutrients and so much pollution from years past that even if we're dumping pure, clean water into the lake, it's still polluted. So we have to clean the water when it leaves the lake and before we can send it south. So, if you have a bathtub full of coffee and you're dumping coffee into it, and all of a sudden you clean it up and you start dumping clean water into it, you still got a bathtub full of coffee. So we need to clean that south. So I think that the EAA reservoir and the filter marsh, or the STA component of the reservoir, are critical projects that will benefit our coastal estuaries, will benefit the lake. So we have more capacity to not have these levels go up so high in Lake Okeechobee, which destroys the aquatic vegetation. And it will provide much needed water to the southern part of the system. So the reservoir is what benefits the Everglades in the dry season, and it provides benefit to us in the wet season by taking large amounts of Lake Okeechobee water and then cleaning it through those filter marshes. I will say, do I wish that Senator Negron's original proposal of 60,000 acre shallow water reservoir was absolutely, that would have been better. But
you can work with the plan that they have.
Yeah. And guess what? If there's a law that says it must meet a certain performance measure. So when they do that, and if it doesn't, then we need more STA. We need more filter marsh. We need to be able to. So yeah, I think it's a huge step forward. Those projects had been delayed for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And the old governing board, many of you might remember, signed into lease the state lands that reservoir was going to be built on, that was going to delay it and probably hold those up in court for another 10 years.
Right.
They're digging out there. The STAs are under construction. So because of people being involved, there's progress. It's never going to happen as fast as any of us would like to see, but
Right.
but
But at
there
least
is
it's
progress.
happening.
It is. It's
Right.
happening, and I think that's probably the one of the most important projects within the entire suite of projects.
All right, perfect. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open up to questions. So anybody that has questions, you can go ahead and either raise your hand or unmute and ask that. Let's just kind of keep everything orally so we don't have everybody asking all at the same time. So who would like to ask the first question?
Chris, we have some very serious doubts about the functioning of STAs. I'm a chemist by training. I've done an awful lot of water quality monitoring and assessment. One of the dirty little secrets that nobody at the district or the Corps has been able to answer is, why do we keep killing the vegetation that has absorbed the nutrients and leaving it back in the water and not removing it? Because once that vegetation decomposes, after the herbicide applications, for example, it re-releases all those same nutrients. So we need a much better treatment system than we have. So there are a lot of people, and I'm one of them, who has real doubts about whether or not the flow south can in fact be clean enough. And I say that with personal concern because my main home is on the Big Cypress Seminole Indian Reservation. So our groundwater, once, if ever, contaminated with such nutrients, will be, irreversibly contaminated. And the Everglades is an oligotrophic ecosystem to begin with, a very, very low nutrient system to begin with. People think we're crazy when we insist on 10 ppb phosphorus, but that's what God intended or whatever. And I think maybe the little subtext of that question is, I know that Governor DeSantis really appreciates you guys, and you probably appreciate him too. And he is a big champion of water quality. And he's also not been too swayed by sugar, at least what we know about him taking funding from them. It doesn't seem as he has. What do you feel like can we do more?
Yeah, great question. Are you, and I absolutely agree. I mean, we saw what happened in the Everglades and Big Cypress and with the mercury pollution from the fertilizers in the EAA back in the 70s. Once, like you said, once you get that in, and the fact that our native vegetation needs very little nutrient. And when you start to see high nutrient levels, you start to get those monocultures of cattails and it chokes out the native vegetation. But are you talking about the chemical treatment within the STAs or just within the system as a whole?
I'm talking about the ability of the ST, not chemical treatment, but I'm talking about the ability of the flow. So the oxidation that happens with the hardly perceptible flow, the vegetative absorption of those nutrients, and the fact that we don't manually remove the vegetation and take it elsewhere to be used for whatever, but just get it out of there. We let the vegetation die in place, decompose, and re-release those nutrients. So
within the STAs.
Within the STAs when we do our herbicide treatments. And my concern isn't really surface water, even though it is surface water, but it's cleanable. Groundwater. Groundwater, I feel, is sacred. And that's what most of South Florida relies on for its drinking sources, because surface storage can't be kept clean enough to use as a drinking source. So we get most of our drinking water from underground. But if we contaminate that underground water, it's game over.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why we are very opposed to the ASR wells that are being proposed.
Yes.
Just look, Mother Nature gets it right. We're in this problem because man tried to play God or whatever and force its way with Mother Nature. Well, our drinking water aquifers are replenished by, that water slowly seeping down through the limestone substrate and replenishing those aquifers. for us to inject that water into the aquifers is ludicrous. As far as the STAs go, we've seen that they can be effective in cleaning polluted runoff from the EAA. We've seen that if they push too much water through them and keep them too high, that it can kill that vegetation off and basically make it to where they're not effective. So and there is a lifespan on them. So when they start, when they're really running in their prime, they can bring those numbers down to, just above 10 parts. And then to where by the time they get in, through their first little bit in the conservation areas, they are meeting that 10 parts drinking water standard. But if they're flooded out, or not treated properly, you lose that capability. You lose that effectiveness. I have actually talked with the district, and when it comes to like managing the actual aquatic and subaquatic plants within the STAs, about that issue, especially with the hyacinths, where they're looking at it as, clogging the control structures. Those need to be manually removed. And they're primed for that, because there's a canal, there's a bank right there, you can pull it out. But your point about, removing those plants, and then by doing so, you're removing the nutrients that are sequestered within them.
Yes.
And then they can be utilized. The next step of that is utilized, right? For whether it's compost or animal feed or whatever. That concept really needs to be applied throughout all of our lakes and rivers, not just the STAs. Because yes, the STAs can be very effective at cleaning polluted water. But if we keep pouring more polluted water into them, eventually they get less effective. And so to me, what's really crazy is you have one agency spending millions of dollars to create filter marsh, to clean that pollution, to take up those nutrients. And then we have another agency that's trying to manage some of the very same aquatic plants, invasive plants, within our lakes and rivers, and by spraying them and returning all that nutrient back in, and in a big flash of nutrients also, which can lead to algae blooms and sparking those algae blooms, and just creates this, that detritus and all that muck.
And you add, and I'm going to shut up and let other people ask questions.
Right.
But now you're also adding herbicides.
Absolutely.
Herbicides are, pesticides are not taken up necessarily by those plants.
That's right.
That is a concern. It's not just phosphorus and nitrogen. Nitrogen is the limiting nutrient in coastal waters, phosphorus inland waters. We get that. But we've got to get the vegetation removed mechanically, taken out of there, and we can avoid the spraying, we can avoid the cost of the spraying, we can avoid the groundwater contamination, we can avoid killing the birds like was in Lake Apopka 10, 15 years ago.
So now we do have a comment I want to get to. So thank you for your question, Rhonda, and that's a wealth of information in that.
And
so we
I
had a comment come in.
agree with that.
All right. We had a comment come in from Bill Klein. I think that the best solution to our polluted water bodies is to stop the pollution that is being dumped into the water, which is what you're alluding to with the herbicides and pesticides. Just sending your expletive to someone else is not a good solution. Right now, polluted water from Lake O is going to the St. Lucie Canal, and the Calusa River has caused their pollution. Sending the expletive to the Everglades will pollute them in Florida Bay. We need to regulate all effluent going to our rivers and lakes, then shut down the companies and organizations that are polluting. So basically what they're saying is the pesticides and chemicals are going into the waters. They're going into these reservoirs, which is adding to that, and it just sits there and it flows down. And he feels that the solution would be shutting down the companies that are creating that issue. What's your opinion on the companies that are directly connected to that pollution and that are in the flow area?
So the pollution that is coming into our waterways, into Lake Okeechobee specifically, which is what he's referring to. Absolutely. We need to address that. And that's why I said we need to address that through real aggressive water quality legislation so that we can hold polluters accountable. That's what we need to do. If we're not holding polluters accountable, they're not going to stop polluting. I will say that we're simply not sending our problem south to the Everglades. There's a federal consent decree, a federal order from a federal judge that you cannot send polluted water into the Everglades. That is why the STAs are there. That's why there must be an STA filter marsh component to the EAA reservoir. If it was a matter of just sending that water south, we could just have a pipeline or a canal that would just send that water from Lake Okeechobee south, but you're not legally allowed to do that. We do not want to do that. We don't want to just send our problem down to the Everglades, to the tribal lands, to Florida Bay, any of that. And so that is why there is a filter marsh component, is because that water must be cleaned before it is sent south. Legally, federal law has to be cleaned to drinking water standards before it is allowed to be flowed south. And so that is already in law. That is already part of the plan. And by no means is Everglades restoration simply sending our problem back. It's cleaning the pollution and sending clean water south to the Everglades. In addition to that, we must attack and address the pollutants and the water quality issue by holding polluters accountable and putting in real, strong, meaningful water quality legislation to stop more pollutants from making their way into our waters going from here forward.
Perfect. So now everybody is really antsy because they want to see stuff done now. We don't want to wait. We want it done now. So as we wait for legislation and as we wait for the construction of the reservoirs to be completed and the results of the cleaning coming through, what's your call to action for people in the meantime?
So right now, and that's a great question. Right now, one of our big call to actions is the Army Corps is working on rewriting LOSOM, or the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual. That is how they manage Lake Okeechobee. Without the infrastructure in place, you can't manage your way out of these problems. But what we can do is look at and try not to make it as bad. Don't hold the lake artificially high in the dry season because you're worried about water supply for the EAA, which then means when we come into the wet season, we have limited capacity in the lake. So managing the lake more in line with how nature would fluctuate the lake up and down, and looking at every opportunity to clean water and send it south in the dry season when it is needed. We saw what happened. We shouldn't let the glades get so dry that they're on fire and the peat moss is burning like we saw a couple of years ago. And we also need to make sure that we have all the conveyance abilities there so that we don't see the water conservation areas and the glades flood like what we saw this past fall. And that was not an effect of sending water from Okeechobee. That was an effect of rainfall on that landscape and sent off of the EAA. So I would say that the focus needs to be on both of those. And yeah, you know what? None of this happens as fast as we would like. Red tape and government and bureaucracy. None of us should ever be satisfied with that. None of us should ever be satisfied with the progress being made. We should always be pushing harder for more, faster. But so LOSOM is a big one right now, because right now they're operating off of a plan from 2008. And we have new projects that are online now. We have bridges on Tamiami Trail that are operational now. We need to rewrite that process and have it be a better process, or at least not as damaging as what the current one is. The other is, we know that funding is the limiting factor in completing a lot of these projects. And so we need to push for very aggressive state and federal funding do these projects as quickly as possible and simultaneous. We need the money. It's an investment. We can't wait. We can't go at the same pace we've been going at.
So push for the LOSOM rewrite and push for proper funding to make sure everything gets through.
Yes.
So that's what we got to do. All right. So we had one more question, but for the sake of time, we're not able to get to it. So for food for thought, I'm going to go ahead and read the question, but we do not have time to get into that. Give me the question. All right. And the question was, how does Chris feel about the state's assumption of the Army Corps' 404 wetland permitting? And then they mentioned that there's a campaign slogan somewhere in there about the red tape causing red tide. And then I had one that just popped in. This is more of a comment. This December, Titusville spills 7.2 million gallons into 2 stormwater ponds that dump into the IRL. They scooped up the sewage and dead fish. They refused to pump out the contaminated muck and water. They will not test the water for nutrients and algae. The FDP only requires that stormwater ponds be tested for available volume. They say that stormwater ponds are supposed to be polluted and that they do not have to be cleaned up. This seems wrong. So we'll leave that as food for thought. If you can just close out with how people can get in contact with you to ask that question and get a recorded or written response from you on that. So what would be the ways that people can interact and get connected with captains?
Sure. You can visit our website, captainsforcleanwater.org. I would encourage people to sign up for our blog or newsletter where we keep people up to date and aware of those call to actions when we have them. You can do that right on the website. It does not cost anything. And then if you'd like to reach us, the best way is to send an email to info@captainsforcleanwater.org. And that way it'll get to our office manager and she'll make sure it gets to the proper person. I'm like the worst person to emails. I think I currently have like probably 10,000 emails in my inbox. So don't email me. email Emily,
Right.
email the info and they'll make sure I get it. But I appreciate the opportunity and I just would reiterate how important it is for everybody to keep fighting and stay vocal. And what we know, one thing without a doubt is if we quiet down and we stay, we get disengaged, the red tape only gets worse and the delays only get worse. And, our policymakers have to hear from us consistently and know that we are not letting up and we are watching.
Absolutely. And I just finished up with the Advocacy Day, where we spent time with legislators, explained to them about our wants, which are largely connected to solar power, because solar power means clean water. But one of the representatives actually mentioned captains and did a little call out saying that captains were name calling and making them feel bad. So let's see what we can do for diplomacy, but still get things moving. But so you're definitely on the radar, and they did call you out by name, so you were not forgotten. You are.
So
mentioned.
this was you don't have to tell me their name, but this was an elected official.
An elected official. All right, but I don't want to get in the name call or anything, but I just want to mention that the pressure is there. You are at the front of mind, so you are noticed, and let's see what we can do to get what we'd like across and keep everybody happy and get the waters clean in the end.
Absolutely.
Chris, is Captain's member of Everglades Coalition?
Yes.
Oh, because you're not listed on the website. I just checked it.
Oh, gotcha.
Oh, it's okay. It's just something they haven't updated yet, but I thought you were. That's why.
Yeah, we've been there. We were there obviously virtually this year.
Okay.
But yeah, we've attended since the short time we've been around, the last few years.
I don't mean the annual conference. I mean the quarterly meetings, because we'll be working together, because this Calusa group is also a member. So that would be great.
Great.
But yeah,
Awesome.
so
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you. So Rhonda, if you want to make sure that we stay connected to them and we can be, brothers in arms to make sure we can get the effort moving. But other than that, we got to call the meeting to adjourn. It is 8:05. So again, Chris, thank you for spending time with us and being our guest speaker. I'll have everybody get in touch with you with those questions at info@captainsforcleanwater.org or on your Facebook page. They can reach you there, and social media.
They can. Yeah, they can. We probably don't get to all the messages that we get on Facebook. So
Best
just to
by
be
email.
transparent there, we get a lot of them and we do our best, but we don't get to all of them.
All right. So perfect. Best thing to do is email. So everybody, thank you for coming out. Thank you for joining our meeting tonight. And Calusa Group for Sierra Club meets the second Wednesday of each month. Business is taken care of at 6 o'clock. Guest speakers come on at 7. So we will see you all next month, which is almost right there, April 14th at 6 p.m. So thank you all. Have a great evening. And meeting is adjourned at
Thanks, y'all.
8:05.
Hi.
Have a great
Thank
night.
you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.